I'm going to start this story with something I never thought I'd admit publicly, especially after more than a decade working in the ICU. I've seen people at their strongest, their weakest, their bravest, and their most vulnerable. I've watched monitors beep for hours without change, and I've seen them explode into chaos with no warning. But nothing, not one shift, not one emergency, not one critical situation, has ever stayed with me the way this night did. And if you're watching this, I want you to stay until the end. Because what my patient whispered right before everything unfolded, it still echoes in my head when I walk down a dim hospital hallway alone. The shift had already been strange even before I stepped into the ICU. You know that feeling you get when you show up to work, and the air just feels heavy? Like there's something waiting for you on the other side of the double doors, something you can sense before you see it. That was me, standing in the elevator, listening to the muffled chatter of the night crew winding down from dinner break. I don't usually get nervous, but I also know better than to ignore instincts. We all develop them in this job. It's like a survival mechanism, and mine was waking up that night. When I clocked in, our charge nurse met me with this look that said, "Brace yourself." She didn't even need to pull me aside. The expression on her face was enough. But she still gave me this hesitant nod and said quietly, "You've got bed 12 tonight." Bed 12. Of all the rooms in the ICU, that one always felt different. Every unit has a room like that. Not haunted, nothing dramatic like that. Just a room where too many unpredictable things happen. A room where alarms seem to go off a little more often, where machines act strange, where families cry harder, where staff walks out a little more shaken than they went in. Bed 12 was that room for us. A place with too many stories, too many rapid responses, too many shifts that ended with staff sitting silently in the break room afterward, staring at the wall. So when she said it, I felt that tiny chill down my spine. Not fear exactly, just anticipation. The sense that tonight wasn't going to be routine. My patient was a man in his late 70s, recovering from a respiratory crisis that had nearly pushed him past the line. But he was stabilizing, improving even. His numbers had been steady all afternoon. His breathing was consistent with the help of a BiPAP machine, and according to the day nurse, he'd even been cracking jokes earlier. He was one of those patients you root for because you can see the fight in them. He really wanted to get better. But there was something else about him. Something the day nurse mentioned in passing, like she didn't want to put too much weight on it. "He's been saying weird things," she told me as we walked down the hall. "Talking about things he's seeing in the room. I don't know if it's the meds or the stress, or just him being tired, but keep an eye on him. He gets agitated when he thinks no one's watching." Patients in the ICU say strange things all the time, especially when they're recovering from respiratory issues or infections, or when they're on certain medications. Hallucinations aren't rare. Confusion isn't rare. Disorientation is practically expected. But something in the way she said it made me pay attention. When I stepped into his room, the first thing I noticed was how awake he was. Not alert in the normal sense. More like he was already waiting for me before I even opened the door. His eyes were locked on the ceiling, his breathing steady but shallow. And the moment I said, "Good evening, I'm your nurse tonight," his eyes slid over to mine like he'd been expecting me specifically. And then he smiled a little. Not a comforting smile. Not a happy one. More like recognition, as if we already shared a secret. I introduced myself, checked his vitals, checked his lines, adjusted the BiPAP slightly, and made sure he was comfortable. Everything was normal. Completely normal. If you had walked in, you would have said, "What's the issue? He looks fine." But when I asked him how he was feeling, he didn't answer with anything about pain or discomfort or breathing. He just looked straight at me, eyes steady, and whispered through the mask, "They're waiting for me." I froze. Not because of the words themselves, but because of the way he said them. Calm, certain, not frightened, not confused, just stating a fact. I tried to keep my voice steady. "Who's waiting for you?" He slowly lifted one hand, thin, shaking, the skin almost translucent, and pointed toward the corner of the room. The one area where the light from the hallway didn't quite reach. The shadows were thicker there, the way they get when equipment creates shapes on the walls. "There," he whispered. "They don't want you to know yet." Goosebumps broke across my arms instantly. Again, ICU patients say strange things all the time. I've had people insist there were spiders on the ceiling, or that they were on a boat, or that they were talking to someone who wasn't there. But this was different. The tone, the precision, the certainty. The way his eyes didn't leave that corner. And then he slowly turned back to me and said something I'll never forget. "They told me you would be here." I forced myself to smile gently, the way nurses do when we need to stabilize an atmosphere. "Well, I'm glad to be here," I said lightly. "You're doing well. Your numbers look good tonight." He didn't respond. He just watched me, not suspiciously, not fearfully, but intensely, like he was studying the way I breathed. The monitors were quiet, his vitals steady. There was nothing clinically concerning. But I walked out of that room with my nerves humming like electricity. The night went on, busy but manageable. I checked on him every hour, sometimes more, just to reassure myself that he was still stable. And every time I walked in, he was awake and watching the same corner of the room. At one point, I caught him whispering to it. Not loudly, not urgently, just softly, like holding a conversation with someone who was listening very closely. Around 2 a.m., the hour of the night when everything feels thinner, when the ICU gets quiet in a way you can feel in your bones, I walked in for another check. His eyes were closed for the first time all night, and I felt this tiny wave of relief. If he was finally resting, maybe whatever strange anxiety had been gnawing at him would settle. I checked the IV pump, adjusted his blanket, scanned over the monitor. Everything normal. Then his hand twitched. At first I thought he was just shifting in his sleep. But then his fingers curled. Not randomly, but deliberately, like he was signaling something. I leaned in, wondering if he was waking up. His eyes opened instantly, and there was nothing restful about them. He looked straight at me and whispered, "It's starting." "What's starting?" I asked, keeping my voice low, calm. Everything in the room felt still, the air suddenly heavier, the monitors steady but almost too steady, like they were holding their breath. He pointed again. Same corner, same slow, deliberate movement. "They said it begins when the room gets quiet," he whispered, "and now it's quiet." A second later, the lights flickered, just once, just enough to make me pause. Hospitals aren't immune to electrical quirks. ICU equipment draws enormous power. Lights flicker sometimes. But the timing, the exact moment after he spoke, struck me in a way I couldn't shake. Before I could respond, his breathing changed. It was subtle at first, a slight hitch, a tightening of the muscles around his ribcage. The monitor didn't react yet, but I could see the shift happening. The way his chest rose faster, the way his eyes darted toward the ceiling again. I touched his shoulder gently. "Hey, stay with me. You're okay. Try to take a slow breath." He didn't look at me. He looked past me, over my shoulder. His eyes widened just slightly, not with fear, but with recognition. "They're behind you now." My entire body went cold. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. It wasn't fear of anything supernatural. Nothing dramatic like that. Just a deep, instinctive dread crawling up my spine. I've been in hundreds of rooms with anxious or hallucinating patients. And I've learned one thing. Sometimes it's best not to feed whatever picture their mind is painting. So I stepped slightly to the side, repositioning myself between him and the monitors. That's when his vitals spiked. The heart rate jumped sharply. The oxygen saturation dipped. The blood pressure climbed fast. It wasn't gradual. It wasn't the slow escalation that comes with discomfort or anxiety. It was instantaneous, like his body had flipped a switch. The alarms erupted a moment later, filling the room with flashing lights and shrill beeping. The eerie silence of seconds before shattered into controlled chaos. I immediately pressed the call button. "I need assistance in bed 12. My voice was steady, trained by years of emergencies, but my pulse was hammering. His breathing was now rapid, shallow, desperate. His hands gripped the sheets, knuckles whitening, muscles tense. His eyes didn't blink. They were fixed upward as if he was seeing something moving across the ceiling. "They're here," he rasped through the mask. "All of them." I adjusted the BiPAP, reassessed his airway, prepared for the possibility that he might need more respiratory support. I kept talking to him, grounding him, repeating his name. Nurses do this instinctively. We anchor patients with our voice, especially when their minds or bodies are in freefall. "It's okay. You're safe. Stay with me. Breathe with me." But he didn't respond to my voice anymore. Not really. He whispered instead, short, fragmented sentences that didn't sound directed at me. "They told me it would happen tonight. They said the room would fill. They said you would see." His heart rate surged higher. The alarms escalated. I heard footsteps rushing down the hallway. But right before backup burst through the door, he turned his head toward me with a sharpness that didn't match his physical weakness. For the first time that night, fear flashed across his face. Real fear. Deep fear. And he whispered one final sentence before the monitors went completely wild. "They said you're next." For a moment, everything inside me froze. I knew it wasn't literal. I knew it was delirium mixed with fear and stress and exhaustion. My training reminded me of that instantly. But a deeper part of me, a part I don't like admitting exists, felt the weight of those words settle onto my shoulders. Then the team rushed in, and the room erupted into one of the most intense emergencies I've ever been part of. The room filled with staff in seconds, the way it always does when alarms reach that pitch. The respiratory therapist moved straight to the head of the bed while another nurse checked the IV lines, and I read off the vitals as they shifted by the second. There's a rhythm to these emergencies, a sort of choreography built from repetition and instinct, but this one felt off. Not clinically. Clinically, it was a typical rapid deterioration. But the atmosphere in that room, it felt heavier than usual, like the air didn't want to move. The patient's breathing kept worsening despite the adjustments to his support. His chest was tight, his eyes darting from corner to ceiling to hallway, as if he was tracking something no one else could see. I stayed by his side, holding his hand even as it trembled. There's something grounding in touch, something human. Machines can beep all they want, but sometimes a patient needs skin-to-skin reassurance more than anything. The charge nurse asked for a full set of labs, and for the crash cart to be brought closer just in case. The respiratory therapist tried to coach the patient through his breaths, but he wasn't responding to verbal cues anymore. His gaze kept lifting over us, following some invisible line across the ceiling tiles. "Talk to me," I said softly, leaning closer. "I'm right here." He blinked once, slowly. Then his voice came through the mask, barely audible but sharp enough to slice through every sound in the room. "They're surrounding you." I didn't react outwardly. Couldn't. But something in my stomach twisted. I kept my voice steady as I told him, "Focus on me. Stay with me." But he was slipping deeper into whatever spiral his mind had created. His grip tightened hard around my fingers, surprising in its strength. His heart rate hit a number I'd never seen on him before. The line on the monitor zigzagged like electricity running through it. The doctor came in, assessed the situation fast, and gave a series of orders. Everyone moved with precision. But even as we worked, even as we followed protocol, even as we controlled the environment step by step, I could feel him watching that same corner of the room, the shadowed one, the one he had pointed at earlier. And then, out of nowhere, the room temperature felt like it dropped. I don't mean dramatically, not in a supernatural way, just enough to raise the hairs on my arms, enough to make every breath feel slightly colder, enough for me to notice the therapist pause for half a second, as if wondering the same thing. The patient whispered again, voice cracking through the mask. "They're telling me to go." I shook my head gently. "You're not going anywhere. We're right here. Focus on your breathing." But he wasn't listening to me anymore. He wasn't listening to any of us. His eyes widened suddenly, and he stared at the foot of the bed with a look that made one of the aides next to me swallow hard. I don't know what he thought he saw, and I don't want to imagine it too vividly now. Then, everything escalated. His oxygen saturation plummeted sharply. His blood pressure dipped. His heart rate surged so high the monitor could barely keep up. And for the first time since I'd met him, panic took over his expression. Pure, unfiltered panic. He turned to me abruptly, as if something had snapped inside him, and he pressed out a sentence I've replayed in my mind over and over since that night. "They said it starts with you." I couldn't process it. Not then. I didn't have time to react beyond a fleeting spike of adrenaline. Because in the very next second, the alarms converged into a single shrill wave. Every number on the screen changed at once. We moved into full emergency mode. The doctor issued orders louder now, more direct. The respiratory therapist prepared for the possibility that we'd need to switch him to a different form of support. The team shifted fast, efficient, focused. But the patient, he was no longer with us in the way that mattered. His breathing was erratic, desperate. His grip on my hand loosened and then tightened again in frantic pulses. His eyes kept flicking between me and the corner like he was torn between watching something and warning me about it. "Stay with us," I repeated. "Keep breathing. You're safe." He shook his head weakly. "They said you shouldn't look away." My heart hammered, but I didn't react. I didn't ask what he meant. I focused on the numbers, on the interventions, on the physical reality of the moment. Still, the weight of his words hung in the air like static. Seconds felt like minutes. The room was filled with movement and sound and urgency, and yet I could still hear every strained breath he fought to take. And then something shifted. His panic faded, not because he was stabilizing, but because he suddenly became eerily calm. Too calm. His muscles relaxed. His eyes softened. His chest rose more gently, not because the situation was improving, but because something in him had given up fighting. He turned his head slowly toward me, the sounds of alarms still blaring around us, and he whispered one last thing that I can still hear perfectly, even now. "They're waiting for you too." And with that, everything on the monitor changed again. The team moved fast, working through every necessary step, adjusting meds, checking lines, stabilizing what we could stabilize. The room was a blur of motion. I did everything I'd been trained to do, the way thousands of nurses have done in thousands of ICUs across the world. It was a coordinated effort, a rapid, high-intensity fight against physiology. But while everyone else focused on the physical crisis, I couldn't shake the emotional impact of his final words. Not fear, not exactly, but a deep, unsettling awareness that something about this night had burrowed itself into me. After several long, chaotic minutes, the situation was finally brought under control. The numbers returned to safer ranges. His breathing was stabilized. The alarms quieted one by one until the room felt still again. We all exhaled in that collective, unspoken way that happens after the peak of an emergency. The doctor gave updated orders. Staff slowly filtered out. The respiratory therapist adjusted the mask one last time and gave me a reassuring nod. And then it was just me and the patient again. The room felt heavier than before, like the walls were holding on to the energy of everything that had happened. He looked at me through half-open eyes, calmer now, tired, drained, but still aware enough to meet my gaze. I sat beside him for a while, monitoring his vitals closely, speaking to him gently, giving him the reassurance that the chaos was over for now. But he didn't say anything else, didn't whisper to the corners, didn't look past me, didn't point. His attention never left my face. It was as if he wanted to make sure I understood something he couldn't articulate beyond those strange, chilling sentences. At around 4 a.m., he finally drifted into a deep sleep, real sleep, the kind that lets the body reset after a storm. I stayed longer than necessary, watching the monitor, listening to the evenness of his breathing, replaying every word he'd said throughout the night. There was no explanation for any of it. No medical reason why his hallucinations focused on me. No clinical logic behind his certainty, his calm, his fear. And yet I couldn't shake the feeling that he had been trying to warn me about something he believed wholeheartedly, something that went far beyond medicine or physiology. When I left the room, walking down the dim hallway where the nightlights cast long shadows on the floor, I couldn't help glancing behind me. Just once, just to make sure no one was there. And even now, long after that shift ended, long after he stabilized and moved on to recovery, long after the adrenaline faded and the hospital brightened with the noise of morning rounds, I sometimes have moments, quiet, still moments, when I remember the way he whispered those words. They're waiting for you too. Sometimes I still feel that cold ripple at the back of my neck. Not fear, not imagination, just awareness. And every time I walk past bed 12, I swear the air still feels different there. Like the room remembers everything that happened that night just as clearly as I do. Thank you for staying with me through this entire story. It was one of the strangest, most unforgettable shifts of my career, and sharing it still brings back the atmosphere of that night in a way I can't fully describe. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and sharing it with someone who appreciates intense hospital stories told by the people who lived them. Your support means more than you know.